When the COVID-19 pandemic shut down the economy, one of the first things on everyone's mind was
jobs, jobs, jobs. That's what it's about.
The pandemic created the biggest spike in unemployment in U.S. history. Between the end of March and the beginning of August, over 1 million people have applied for unemployment insurance each week. At its height, nearly 15% of working Americans were unemployed. Because of the massive influx, millions of people reported their unemployment benefits, which they have paid taxes towards for years, were delayed or never came at all. In total, over 50 million Americans filed for unemployment insurance since the pandemic-implemented shutdown began. And unlike in many other wealthy countries, Americans depend on their jobs, not just to pay for food and housing, but also for health care. And that has meant that millions have lost their jobs, their incomes, and their health insurance during a public health emergency. No doubt, the COVID pandemic laid bare the critical role of our unemployment system, as well as its flaws. Each generation has felt the weight of the pandemic in their own way, but young workers have likely been impacted most of all. Millennials, who are currently between the ages of 24 and 38, are often said to be the most overworked and underpaid generation. Many are still recovering from the 2008 financial crisis, and now millennials may be the hardest hit group by the economic turmoil of the pandemic.
I have 2 children in Puerto Rico and I need to send the child support.
Luckily for me, my friend offered for me to stay with him for free so I don't have to worry about rent.
What I'm experienced to do no longer pertains to the world that we're living in right now.
The opportunities are not there as much as before.
Unemployment rates have hovered around 4 to 5% over the past 5 years. But when state governments were forced to close down the economy to stop the spread of COVID, that percentage spiked. Since March, nearly 50 million people filed for unemployment. Unemployment in the U.S. is currently over 10%, but millions have still not received the benefits they qualify for. According to an analysis by ProPublica, just 24% of jobless white workers, 22% of Hispanic workers, and just 13% of jobless Black workers have received unemployment benefits during the pandemic.
Initially, it was received that this is the right thing to do. We need, in order to deal with the pandemic, we need people to stand down and we need to slow the economy.
Analysts, lawmakers, and unemployed Americans quickly realized traditional unemployment checks were simply not going to be enough. And they fear that the economic reality for millions of Americans could get worse, a lot worse.
I think, unfortunately, we haven't seen the biggest part of this crisis yet. The unprecedented intervention to do an eviction moratorium and things like that. Those are eventually going to run out. And when that happens, people are going to start facing the demand side shock here of, how am I going to make my rent? Right now, I'm not paying my rent.
So they will be evicted and become homeless, which will put a demand on our homeless shelters and other support services that help those who do not have a place to live.
It's going to be the terrifying point at which we have to start really thinking about bigger solutions, like a UBI throughout this crisis.
UBI stands for Universal Basic Income, a system in which governments give cash directly to citizens, no strings attached. But let's back up for a second. Federal and state unemployment insurance was established in 1935, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act. Today, each state and territory has its own way of handling benefits, which means there are 53 different unemployment systems in the country. Typically, unemployed people receive payments for up to 6 months as long as they are actively searching for work. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, unemployment was used as a temporary solution to compensate about half of workers' wages in between jobs. Generally, unemployment has hovered around 4 to 5% over the past 5 years, but the COVID-19 pandemic has created a massive backup in the unemployment system.
Our current unemployment insurance system is not designed for these kinds of prolonged recessions. It's really designed to help a worker who leaves one job to transition to the next job.
This design made online filing for unemployment during the pandemic impossible in some states. Websites crashed, people made hundreds of calls, and waited in spiraling lines just to file their claims.
At the beginning, it was so difficult because the system collapsed often.
My husband, when he filed unemployment, He only received a letter. He never received the money.
Our unemployment insurance offices are working on rather antiquated technology.
It actually took 12 to 13 weeks for me to receive my payment.
Hundreds and hundreds, probably 1,000 phone calls to unemployment just to simply file.
I know a lot of flight attendants didn't receive their unemployment longer than I have. They still haven't.
That was a real nightmare.
Workers really need this money now. Many households are on the verge of eviction.
Numbers on new evictions coming up.
Millions of Americans are at risk of eviction.
These people are paying rent to landlords. Landlords have to pay their mortgages. They have to pay their property taxes. That ripples through the economy.
In March of 2020, the federal government issued the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, better known as the CARES Act. The CARES Act extended unemployment benefits, widened the eligibility enrollment pool, and provided an unprecedented $600 per week boost that each unemployed person would receive on top of their state unemployment benefits.
Republican administrations have done this. Democratic administrations have done this. Giving massive stimulus checks all at the same time do stimulate the economy. It keeps the bottom from falling out. Probably the only thing that's keeping this economy afloat right now is that extra $600.
That $600 a week figure wasn't pulled from thin air. The median weekly pay in the United States is roughly $1,000, and our current unemployment insurance program is designed to replace roughly 40% of a worker's previous wages. The extra $600 was calculated to ensure that the average worker had 100% of their previous wages replaced. And that $600 has been a lifeline for millions of Americans.
I very much depended on that extra $600 weekly to feed myself, to pay my bills, pay my rent, take care of my dog. This wasn't an extra kicker where, ooh, let me buy a new Gucci bag.
The $600 stimulus boost, it was honestly a boost to our lives.
$600 isn't, since it's already gone, it's not going to help me in the long run. It's not, like, I'll be probably get more money if I just find a job, even in retail.
I can tell you right now, I'm behind one month in Puerto Rico with my child support. You know, literally, I use the stimulus check for, send it to my kids over there.
Researchers at the University of Chicago estimate that roughly 2/3 of unemployed workers made more from enhanced unemployment insurance than they did when they were working. And this has created a controversy between those who say the extra money will disincentivize people from working and those who say how crucial the extra money was demonstrates that unemployment and the minimum wage were not high enough to begin with.
About the consumer who, many cases, is making more money with unemployment than they were with their regular salary, is in a better place for as long as that lives.
The concern is that there's a disincentive for workers to take a job. They say to themselves, hey, I'm making more by taking unemployment benefits than I would be if I were actually working. What it doesn't incorporate is psychology and actual human behavior. People actually want and need to work.
This idea that unemployed people are, quote, lazy has long been leveraged against low-income workers and millennials.
I'm a millennial. We have now been hit with two of the biggest once-in-a-century economic hits within 10 years. And already coming out of the Great Recession, our earning power was significantly lessened. Our ability to build equity and assets was significantly lessened because we came out into a poor, extremely poor, 8, 9, 10% unemployment economy with stagnant wages for another 5-6 years. And then we have this happen.
And because of these economic setbacks in 2008 and today, many millennials have been forced to delay traditional markers of adulthood, such as buying a home, starting a family, or getting married.
My husband and I really do want to have kids, but it would be a financial burden on us. I want to have stability. I want to be able to not live paycheck to paycheck.
It will also mean that they don't have the cushion to invest in their children. So I would expect to see some impact on the next generation.
And even as states begin reopening efforts, it's unclear if there are jobs for unemployed workers to return to, especially jobs that are disproportionately held by millennials without college degrees, such as retail and service industry roles.
I'm in a bit of a pickle right now because what I'm experienced to do no longer pertains to the world that we're living in right now.
Our airline reduced our hours drastically due to COVID. I want to say 60 to 90% of our flights were reduced.
I applied for at least for 2 or 3 different jobs daily, but nobody called you.
It is a stereotype to just think that people that maybe do not make as much are just squandering money. You know, there are people like myself that are working very hard, you know, to not only make money, but help other people.
We've never had a situation in which the government has told businesses they can't operate. And so there's a unique justification here that the government should compensate you for being told you can't operate or for being told you can't go to work.
Most economists that I know believe that the federal government needs to continue this form of support. We have not reached the end of this pandemic.
That $600 payment had a dramatic role in minimizing the hardships caused by closing down the economy. And that's because unemployment benefits don't just help a singular individual. They keep families afloat, encourage spending, support local jobs, and help local governments continue to fund schools and public services. It all comes back around. This is the same logic proponents of UBI use. And it's the same logic behind the $1,200 stimulus checks that were given to Americans making less than $75,000 back in April. Experts say these checks gave Americans crucial cash when they needed it most. People like Patel point out that these lump sums are a taste of what universal basic income.
But I'm willing to bet that after that, people are going to be so used to the idea, having that sort of risk support for all people, it's going to be beneficial.
To be sure, the past several months of elevated unemployment may have given us a taste of future problems. People, such as former presidential candidate Andrew Yang, have long raised concerns that automation could create sustained, elevated unemployment. Yang's solution is to send Americans cash directly. Sound familiar? In this way, the pandemic may have given us our biggest experiment with UBI yet.